No one has to hurt. Not here, where you can see.
Every Adam Sandler movie has Adam Sandler, his real-life friends that he casts to probably save money, and of course, a stunning woman who falls blindly in love with him. But Spaceman doesn't really feel like an Adam Sandler movie. Adam Sandler has come a long ways since his goofball acting days, and he delivers his career's best performance in space. But he still isn't the most talked about character from the movie. Yeah, I know why you're here. For Hanuš. The itsy-bitsy spider alien from the movie was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. While the existence and purpose of Hanuš is open to interpretation, we tend to believe that he was the embodiment of Jakub's loneliness and a manifestation of his mental state. Let's go over the evidence to support this theory as we pour over every second of this beautiful movie. Before we get into our explanation, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. So thank you. Let's begin. Is Hanuš real or a spaceborne hallucination? Hanuš, or should I say Jakub's imagination, being the wisdom-filled philosopher he has been throughout the movie, said it himself. When he notices Jakub on the treadmill, he questions the purpose of the act. Jakub informs him that he must exercise to stop his bones from decaying. Hanuš reflects on it and says, "You choose to flee your planet, yet that act is destructive to you." This hints towards the physical and psychological changes humans go through when they're in space. Hanuš's statement, plus all the other proof of Jakub's hallucination that we'll be pointing out in this video, becomes one of the most revealing signs that Hanuš was merely a figment of Jakub's imagination. But before we get into that, let's talk about some real-life instances of astronauts experiencing hallucinations in prolonged space travels. Reports of astronauts and space travelers experiencing hallucinations are one of the most controversial topics among space enthusiasts. An international study found that space travel impairs the body's ability to regulate blood flow to the brain, contributing to vision issues and sometimes hallucinations. As for the real-life hallucinations experienced by astronauts, an instance from 1976 comes to mind. Crew members from the Russian Soyuz 21 mission reported an acrid smell aboard, but when inspected, no odor or technical issues were found. And who doesn't remember the early times of the Apollo missions, when astronauts often reported seeing regular flashes or streaks of light that seemed to appear out of nowhere? Astronaut Don described these experiences as flashes in my eyes, like luminous dancing fairies. These instances form the basis for exploring Hanuš's true identity in the story.
They threw you in the river because of your dad.
Jakub's mental state and his search for connection through Hanuš. From the start of the movie, loneliness is dripping off of Jakub's face and mood. The guy's been in space for 189 days and still looks depressed to be on a podcast where he could interact with people. He puts on a fake smile and gets asked the only question that could spiral him even further downwards. Realizing that you're being called the loneliest man in the world while your wife refuses to talk to you can do some serious damage to a man's psyche in this situation. Starting from here, we see Peter's consistent concern about Jakub's physical and mental state. He's having trouble sleeping, and the bags under his eyes tell us it's been going on for a while. The constant interruptions of the broken toilet, his mental state, sleep deprivation, and his wife screening his calls are sure-shot struggles he faced that must have initiated his hallucinations. But how? Well, before Hanuš appears, Jakub has a nightmare about a spider crawling under the skin of his face and then coming out of his mouth. The very next day, Jakub overhears radio interference, and you can hear a guy say, "Hello, how may I help you?" which to me sounds similar to when you dial or receive a wrong or unknown call. It's hard to say whether there was actually any radio interference or if it was another of Jakub's hallucinations, but I do think both the nightmare and the interference were a representation of how Hanuš, a spider-shaped entity that wanted to help Jakub, must have shaped his hallucinations. In one of Jakub's memories, he and Lenka are in the middle of a fight. He talks about how when you're in a relationship, you amputate a part of yourself and replace it with a part of that person. Hanuš could metaphorically be the part of Jakub that he amputated, only to be eventually replaced with the part of Lenka at the end of the movie. This makes Hanuš the bridge between him and Lenka that Jakub's mind created when Lenka started pulling away. Before Hanuš appeared, Jakub could be seen dismissing his memories of the time he spent with Lenka. But the guy is in severe emotional turmoil, and I think he subconsciously knew that he needed to explore these memories to better understand the cause of his failing marriage. That's where Hanuš comes along as an external source that not only helped him explore Lenka's memories, but also comforted him with the idea that it was okay to go down this exploration. Having come so close to the Chopra cloud, which was his big discovery, it fell short of Jakub's expectations about the ultimate purpose of life, which is why Hanuš encouraged him to find a new discovery, and by the end of the movie, he realizes Lenka was it.
And the star-crossed lovers.
Lack of evidence for Hanush's existence. Throughout the movie, there's a consistent lack of evidence that indicates that Hanush's presence was never detected inside the spacecraft by Mission Control. Even though half the spacecraft's cameras were malfunctioning, the other half must be operational. And if you remember, Jakub and Hanush often wandered the ship while talking or when Jakub wanted to reconnect with Mission Control. But Hanush was never detected in any of the cameras that must be working. I mean, if they could instantly detect whenever Jakub entered an airlock or took the bomba out to help Hanush, how would they fail to notice Hanush therapizing Jakub all over the ship? Not only that, but Peter heard Jakub talking to Hanush on 2 separate instances, but he was never able to hear Hanush's voice over the intercom. But let's assume for a second that none of the cameras were working, or maybe Hanush had a predator-like ability to bend light around his body, making him invisible to the naked eye. Firstly, Mission Control would have noticed Jakub talking to Hanush's invisible body. Additionally, Mission Control can usually initiate an intercom and hear the astronauts in most modern spacecraft without needing the astronauts to activate it themselves. So naturally, if they did see and hear him talking to Hanush's invisible body, they would have been even more concerned about Jakub's mental state than shown in the movie. In my opinion, not only Hanush, but even the conversations Jakub had with Hanush were, in fact, a part of his hallucinations. This is proven in the last scene during Chopra Cloud's sample collection, when 1 second ago, Jakub was talking to Peter over the phone without pressing any buttons, and the next second, he was constantly shouting Hanush's name. During this, Peter never asks him who Hanush is or why he's shouting, which can only mean that Jakub was probably imagining calling Hanush's name instead of actually doing it. The few instances where Peter did hear Jakub talking to Hanush must have been the only times when Jakub actually talked out loud instead of just talking in the hallucination. To solidify this point further, let's talk about a spacecraft that has multiple devices other than a camera to detect an alien/foreign presence on the spacecraft. Not only do they have temperature sensors, radiation sensors, and movement sensors, they also have devices to detect oxygen levels and air quality. Now, let's assume that Hanush can breathe since he has a prominent human-like nose and mouth with teeth. Do you really think that even with all those sensors and detectors, Mission Control still wouldn't be able to detect his heat signature, notice any disturbance in air quality or O2 levels or heat levels, unless Hanush, indeed, was just a figment of Jakub's imagination? The intertwined journeys of Jakub, Hanush, and Lenka. 2 of the most prominent themes of the story lie in the Jakub-Hanush-Lenka parallel, as well as the beginning and the end. All 3 characters are not only connected with each other, but also seem to be on a similar journey. This connection and dissection of their journey gives a deeper insight into Hanush's origin and purpose in the story.
But soon, the grumpets will weaken me enough to consume my flesh.
Jakub's Parallel. Starting with Jakub, the 189-day-long solo space mission has given him too much time to reflect on his life and personality. During his time on Earth, he was a self-centered and indifferent individual. He kept running away, chasing his discovery and repentance for his dead father's actions, rather than focusing on his wife and kids. He loved Lenka, but never made a real effort to know her, or allowed emotional vulnerability into their relationship. I mean, the guy was legit more concerned about his burning eggs than his lonely crying wife who just lost their baby. As Hanush pointed out, Jakub was a person with many boundaries, and that was the cause of his loneliness. But now that he was on a solo mission with the hum of worldly concerns 500 million kilometers behind him, silence and overthinking consumed him. The walls of his boundaries split open, and Hanush became a vessel through which he filtered his thoughts and memories and realized that Lenka was the only thing of value in his life. But how is it an end for him? Well, to reach Lenka through Hanush, Jakub had to kill the selfish and indifferent version of himself, the part that withdraws from emotions and confrontations, the part that is haunted by his father's sins and makes him chase after greatness. According to Hanush, only after killing his past self could he reach his new discovery, his Lenka.
Why commit to a promise if it can readily be broken?
Hanush's Parallel. Despite what you might think, Hanush is on a similar journey as Jakub. No, I'm not talking about their shared love for chocolate or how Jakub turned to orchestra and Hanush turned to the vibration of the toilet for soothing purposes. I'm talking about the fact that even if Hanush was only a manifestation of Jakub's imagination, his backstory reflects how he was just a bridge between the beginning and the end of Jakub's story. Hanush's home was unknown, but we do know that the Gorumpeds destroyed everything Hanush must have considered dear to him. His beginning was already lost, and he traveled through galaxies and black holes to find solace, a purpose similar to Jakub's. Then they found solace in each other. From here on out, Hanush becomes a companion and a sounding board for Jakub to confront his inner struggles. He challenges Jakub to reflect on his strained relationship with Lenka and his own shortcomings. His departure coincides with Jakub's emotional growth, suggesting Hanush's purpose was to guide him towards self-awareness. Through his own recollection, we get to know that Hanush has been around from the beginning, or close to the beginning of the universe. Since her conversation with Commissioner 2 Uma, Lenka says that Jakub didn't believe in their love story. And so, after reigniting the passion for Lenka in Jakub's heart and working as a catalyst to make him believe in his love story, Hanush's purpose is fulfilled. Hanush eventually dies and merges with the Chopra cloud, marking the end of his journey and purpose in Jakub's life. There are two important points to note here that again hints that Hanush and his story was just part of Jakub's imagination. The first is how Hanush never told him about his nearing death when Jakub asked him about his home. Hanush's approaching death was conveniently introduced only after he helped Jakub reconnect with Lenka. The second is how conveniently Hanush appeared and disappeared throughout the movie. Considering that if Hanush was real for even a second, it's still hard to believe that he had the ability to pass through matter since he doesn't seem to be a robot with advanced technology or, like a space ghost or something. Plus, he's constantly seen climbing, holding things, and opening doors instead of passing through them. This raises the question of how he got inside the spacecraft unless he was merely a manifestation of Jakub's psyche. Having said that, do you remember when Jakub was attempting sample collection of the Chopra cloud and one second Hanush was inside the ship, but the next he was suddenly out there floating away in space? Not only did he magically get outside the ship, but he was clearly shown floating away. But when Jakub finally made it out of the spacecraft, Hanush had barely gone anywhere. How did Jakub go to the storage space, take out the bomba, suit up, and get outside so fast that Hanush had barely even floated a few yards away? Every cell of his body was being eaten away by Gorumpeds. No way he was able to make an effort to stay close to the ship. This revelation gives us another insight into how Hanush could not float too far since he was created by Jakub's mind. Even during their very last conversation, Jakub tells Hanush that he can sense him slipping away, solidifying the basis of our revelation that Jakub is just as connected to Hanush as it is the other way around. Now, I know what you might be wondering. If Hanush was only a mental bridge to guide Jakub to Lenka, why did he come back after Jakub patched things up with her? Well, for that answer, you're just gonna have to hold tight for our marvelous verdict.
If I'd known then what I know now, would I have kissed you?
Lenka's Parallel. Lenka is the last and the most important key to this story. When Jakub was at the beginning of his revelations, she was at the end of hers. She had already done it all. She had loved Jakub, carried and lost his child, and waited for him through the years in the hope that he might eventually find his way back to her. But this time apart has given her a lot of time to think too. As Hanush described it, she felt Jakub's lies inside her. He welcomed her sadness and made her feel like she would evaporate. But as she said in her recording at the start, people change. And if you don't let them change, they die. And so, she was at the end of it all. She knew that he was not afraid to be on his own. She was afraid at first, but now she wasn't afraid to welcome the end anymore. While Jakub was someone who loved himself more than anyone else and needed to learn how to love her more than himself, Lenka was on a journey to learn to love herself more than she loved Jakub. This shows the parallelity of their experience throughout the movie. But despite all of that, she eventually finds her way back to Jakub after his confession. It isn't emphasized exclusively, but in the end, she has a conversation with a woman who says she would rather be on Earth than chasing space dust. To this, Lenka simply replies, "It's a very glittery dust." This represents how, even though she didn't like Jakub being so ambitious, she understood the appeal of it. Now, you might think that there's no direct connection between Lenka and Hanush, but Hanush himself explains how they're actually connected. When Jakub sees the vision of Lenka's miscarriage, Hanush tells him that even though he was not present with her, his thoughts were there. Throughout the movie, Lenka's words, "You go where I go," are played in the background multiple times, symbolizing that they're connected, and Hanush is the bridge holding both ends together.
It is time. Your great discovery awaits.
Beyond hallucination. The Chopra cloud's role in Jakub's hallucinations. There aren't too many references to how Jakub's hallucinations might have been caused by the Chopra cloud, but there's one solid reason for us to believe that. There was a scene where a video recording of Lenka suddenly starts playing. When Jakub asks Hanush to stop it because he thought it was Hanush initiating a memory inside his brain, Hanush says, "I am not the cause of this." This dialogue makes you wonder if it was Chopra's doing all along. When Jakub goes to investigate, Lenka can be seen on the screen complaining that he doesn't talk to her, and when he dreams, he leaves. Just then, a grain from the beginning comes out of the projector. The fact that the grain not only plays a recording from Lenka, but one that clearly depicts the underlying issue and theme of Jakub's journey speaks volumes of the part Chopra Cloud had to play in the story. When Jakub tries to contain the grain in a box, Hanush says, "It cannot be held, skinny human." During another conversation about what Hanush knows about the cloud, he says, "It's a repository." And the human tribe does not have words to describe what it represents. It can only be felt and experienced when encountered. This comes very close to how one would describe the feeling of being in love, which is obviously the central theme of the story. When Hanush finally takes Jakub inside the Chopra cloud, he describes it as everything, the beginning and the end, every vibration of all time. The cloud contains the past and the future. It contains Hanush, Jakub, Lenka, and his father. It contains every promise, every heartbreak, every atonement. Hanush says everything is permanent, yet nothing ever is. That is the truth of the universe, which somehow captures the essence of being human. While Jakub is in the cloud, we hear Lenka ask him, "Do you ever think about what you've learned a little bit late in your life?" And Jakub replies, "Maybe I'm not at that point yet." This dialogue can be considered a representation of how the Chopra cloud has been trying to get him to that point through Hanush. It's a point where he doesn't have to hurt anyone, where he understands the cost, where the pain he's been inflicting on himself is not of value to him anymore. The beginning makes Jakub remember his beginning with Lenka, the day he met her. He looks at her with her face lit up and says, "If only I saw her always how I saw her then," capping on the journey that the beginning was compelling him to take to his water nymph, to his Lenka. And he finally found his end at the beginning and his beginning at the end. Lenka was the water nymph from Jakub's story, and he would die if he kissed her, but he's finally cool with that. In the final shot, we see Lenka seeing a grain from the beginning. She looks up at the sky and both she and Jakub say each other's names, which showcases that in that moment, they were connected with each other through the beginning of the universe, through the beginning of their relationship. This strengthens our understanding of how everything was connected and how the Chopra cloud was not only just as important as Hanush, but could be the very thing that birthed the idea of Hanush in Jakub's mind. One last reason why we think the Chopra cloud was the mastermind behind it all could be because without Jakub's hallucinations, he never would have gone out to save Hanush and probably would have ended up dying in his spacecraft. That would have rendered Jakub's whole journey moot because from the beginning, the goal of the story seemed to be etched into Jakub finding his way back to Lenka.
Everything is permanent, yet nothing ever is.
Marvelous verdict! Coming back to the question of why Hanush came back even after Jakub's confession to Lenka, well, even after resolving things with Lenka, Jakub still had issues with his father. Watching his ship drown into the Chopra cloud made him recall the memory of his father saving him from drowning when he was a kid. Jakub initially described his father as a good man who did bad things, and eventually he's able to absolve the sins of his father and his own sins, which finally made him let go of the childhood trauma and his need to achieve greatness to make up for his father's sins. Only after doing that was he ready to face the truth of the universe inside the Chopra cloud. That's all for this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Stay safe out there, thanks for watching, and have a marvelous day.